Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Paul Cohen. I'm the account executive for Flowable North America, based here in Denver, Colorado, which is where our US headquarters is located. Also on the phone or on the webinar, we have Michael Gordon, who is inside sales for Flowable North America, as well as Charlie Franco, who is the director of sales for Flowable North America. And again, wanted to thank you guys for joining today. We've got a lot of content to cover today, as well as a demo. And so just to kind of set the scene, we're going to go through a few slides, give you an overview on Flowable, who we are, what we do, how we're advancing the product, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we are focusing on the financial and banking industries and some of the applications and use cases that our customers are using in those verticals. And then we'll jump into a brief demonstration on some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and get started. As many of you might know or don't know, Flowable is an open source project. We actually started as a Java-based BPM as a fork from Activity in 2016. And the entire product team that started Activity, that worked on Activity and co-founded Alfresco, is the same team that has started and developed Flowable. And in 2016, when we forked, we knew that we wanted to be an open source project. We wanted to have our roots as open source, as a Java-based BPM open source platform. And a lot of that sticks with us today. I think some of the things that we'll talk about today and some of the things that I'll show in the demonstration are more centered around the enterprise version. However, the open source platform will always be there, and we're building the Flowable platform and all the advancements from a feature functionality perspective around those core open source engines. And so from a development perspective, what you'll see with Flowable is certainly in today's call and the demo is that there are a lot of things that we're doing out of the box to make it very low code. Some of the advancements that we're putting into the product are very low code in nature, but we'll always have those open source roots. So from a development perspective, the product and the platform is extremely extensible, customizable, and we're never going to get rid of that core value of being open source. So I think it's important to note that all the code is managed by Flowable and the Flowable staff from an engine perspective. But we do employ 3 different engines as a core capability. That's the business process management engine, and we are compliant with the OMG standards of 2.0, as well as case management and modeling notation 1.1 from OMG. One of the biggest differentiators from Flowable is our ability to natively do case management using CMMN as a native notation. And then of course DMN, which is your decision modeling notation. This is where you're going to be able to employ and develop and configure your business rules. The engines that we're producing today are the fastest that we've ever produced. And we're making a lot of advancements and a lot of changes to make it even easier and more efficient around the workflow capabilities and the automation aspects that the engines provide. So our latest release on the open source side was 6.6. We actually have 6.7 coming soon. And again, there's some really cool and useful changes that we're making in the code itself to make it even faster and more scalable from an enterprise perspective. So as I mentioned, we were a fork from Activity back in 2016. You'll notice a few other names on here, but our roots go back. The lineage goes back to even the JBPM days. As I mentioned, that core development team that started and founded Flowable, or JBPM and Activity are the same team that started and founded Flowable. And we're just making more advancements on the product itself around the enterprise version. I do want to mention our community, right? From an open source perspective, the community is key. We do have a very active community on GitHub, and you can see that our spike is relatively higher than some of our competitors. I think just from a peer perspective on timing, as well as the community users that are using the open source version, making advancements. Of course, we have thousands and thousands of open source users that we don't know about, and that's great. I think that goes back to our core value of being an open source product. We still want to maintain all of the open source capabilities from a Java-based BPM perspective, as well as putting the R&D and our investment back into the commercial product itself. I'll kind of skip through some of these slides, but again, from a performance perspective, you can see that even the later versions or the previous versions of Flowable are extremely fast, extremely scalable. You can use them in a serverless manner or deploy them in a number of different deployment methodologies or topologies of your liking. And so from an architecture perspective, we're focused on really four primary areas, right? Can we be transactional and fast? How can we abstract those data sources for things like GDPR and regulatory compliance? Certainly, relevant to the financial and banking industry. And then making sure that we're adapting and changing some of the old legacy code that was part of, the original release of the engines, so that we're keeping up with the latest technologies and supporting other third-party open source platforms a lot more efficiently and a lot more scalable from that perspective. So why Flowable, right? We do position ourselves as a leader for open source intelligent business automation. As a company, we are a global company. So we do have 14 locations across the globe. Our global headquarters is in Switzerland, in Zurich. Here in the US, as I mentioned before, we're in Denver and Charlotte. We do have an office in Toronto as well, or right outside of Toronto, and extremely expanding the footprint in North America here. We're growing at a tremendous rate. We're actually comprised of, I think, well over 370 employees now, most of which are software developers, architects, engineers, and our lineage, our roots go back 21 years plus now in supporting open source technologies and different methodologies in different ways from a consulting and development perspective. But here in the US, we're a bit smaller team. I think there's about 20 of us now that, again, are primarily engineering and development resources spread across the country. Here in the US, it's myself and Michael and Charlie that are running sales and expanding the footprint there. So why do intelligent business automation? I think there's a lot of reasons why companies are looking at automation, right? There's a lot of different buzzwords in the industry, certainly around digital transformation, automation, different technologies like RPA, or robotic process automation. And I think where we're finding the Flowable platform as a unique fit is really in that middle tier, right? So a lot of the things that you'll see today, a lot of the things that we'll talk about are centered around low code capability, but still maintaining that extensibility aspect, the customizability aspect of the platform, so that you don't have to just use Flowable out of the box as is, right? There's a lot of different options on how you deploy different projects that you want to create, and different ways that you can use Flowable out of the box that's fully supported. So since COVID, we've seen a number of different customer challenges. I think that all of these span across all of our clients, whether it's in the financial and banking industry or it's in other verticals. And we've kind of narrowed it down to, I would say, these 3 or 4 different pillars of challenges, right? The first one is change, especially since COVID. We've seen our customer base having to expedite their digital transformation efforts. And, this is really coming from, the idea of disrupt or be disrupted. How can we continually enhance our customer engagement and achieve that operational excellence? Because if you don't do it, right, your competitor is definitely thinking about it or already doing it. How agile can we be, right? We always have changing business requirements, regulatory laws and compliance measures around data privacy and so forth are changing. The market conditions are changing, especially around financial and banking, right? We're always looking at ways to digitalize some of those arduous tasks and manual tasks and so forth. So how can we adapt to those changing market conditions? And then, the need to change those business applications. What you'll see with Flowable is that, within, our methodology of how we go about using the product and building these business applications, make it a lot easier and a lot more efficient for you to change and be agile to your customers' needs and employ these applications and use them in the real world very quickly and efficiently. And then, of course, again, speed, right? How fast can we do it? We're all struggling with limited resources and limited budgets. And how quickly can we bring our product or this new technology to market, right? Time to value is key. And then, of course, the compliance that's really driving everything. We've seen a number of different changes, certainly in the last 10 years, I would say, and even sooner, around privacy, data privacy, compliance, regulatory compliance, et cetera. So how can we build these applications and make sure that we are complying with those regulatory standards And in a highly regulated, industry like financial and banking, this is absolutely key. Right? We have to track every transaction. We have to track every click and every piece of data that's entered. And the capabilities and the technology that Flowable is employing allows you to do that in a very easy, simple way. So what's the problem, right? We've seen kind of two different sides of the spectrum. And again, this is mostly within the last couple of years, I would say. I think COVID, again, is a major driver of this. But, one way to do this is, and what our clients are telling us, if they have these solutions of innovations, right? This silo-based approach, where different business units within the organization are adopting new technology, but it's not cohesive. And a lot of times the customer falls in between. A lot of times the organizations are doubling down on technology that really doesn't need to be doubled down on, right? They're spending more money on different areas just for specific use cases. And what happens is you have these islands of innovation where one business or a few business units within the organization are advancing their technology, but the rest of the organization is not, right? And so you have a lot of duplication of efforts and really no cohesiveness in general on modeling that business activity. On the other side of the spectrum, right, let's call it boil the ocean. Right? We've seen this monolithic way to model the end-to-end activity, and what you end up with is this spaghetti-looking model of a simple use case or a simple process that just becomes overly complex, right? So, you have a high chance of failure, too many interdependencies among business systems and other third-party applications that you might want to integrate with. Certainly the lack of agility, right, to truly address those business needs, your client needs, and allow you to model the business activity as a whole in a very simple low-code way. So what we do is at Flowable, and what we're really spending a lot of time on the product side, is really being able to leverage those three core engine capabilities, right? The case management engine, the business process management engine, and the decision modeling engine, to be able to use those interchangeably together to have a nice, clean, more efficient way to manage the complete life cycle of your business activity. And of course, I'll explain a little bit more on what this means and how we actually go about doing it. But what we're finding is the clients that are really taking Flowable and leveraging these three core capabilities are having quicker time to market. They're able to build their applications a lot more efficiently. They're able to change their applications a lot more efficiently because we're not looking at this from a linear perspective anymore. We're looking at this from a life cycle perspective, right? Or a case management type of perspective where I'm not dependent on step one, step two, step three. I can actually model a business activity that might have other human action that doesn't require anything else from anything else outside of the application itself, right? So there's a lot of different methodologies that you can use and leverage just by understanding how to use CMMN, BPMN, and DMN. So how do we do this, right? We want to model the complete business activity. And so we want to model those relationships between the stages of that activity, right? Giving you those operational steps from repeatable processes, from discretionary workers, from knowledge transfer, or even from third-party systems that are capturing, some of the data aggregation and data points from AI or ML systems that you might want to use, and gives you this perspective of using this concept of an app, right? A flowable application to address the specific need of that use case, but also being able to use the tool set to build it and customize it and deploy it very quickly and very efficiently. So we have this concept of model-driven approach. And I think this is important because this is a key aspect of how we are building the product, again, how we are presenting to clients that are interested in using Flowable in any part of the organization. And again, everything is built around those open source engines. And so if you see the first layer, if you will, of models, right? We have our traditional models, and those are case models, process models, traditional workflows, business rules, that's what we would consider DMN, perhaps human tasks and forms that are associated with those tasks, right? Those are really kind of the basic types of models that you're used to in building some of the applications that you might already have deployed today. But Flowable is taking it a step further and adding some additional capabilities around this model-driven approach to business automation, things like event registry integration and content models, or security models, right? Everything on the outside, the chat, the custom views, the people, these are all additional aspects of business activity that play an important integral part of building, your workflow and your applications that you may not get with other applications or other systems. All right, things like the security policies, being able to get granular security policies on who has access to what, who can complete a particular task, integrating things like content models, right, with the ability to generate documents based on form fields or based on data that's being driven through Flowable, and have a complete application that's really modeling the business activity from a whole. So how do we do that, right? The first thing we have to do is we have to build those models. And again, with the demo that I'll show here in a minute, we have the capability to really employ some complex workflows and some complex applications using the low-code feature functionality of Flowable Design. So there's really 3 steps into building your first application. First one is design, right? We have to build those models. We have to employ the entire business activity that we're focusing on, or the use case. Then we have to execute them, right? We have to push those to runtime. We have to make sure that those applications go live for our clients. And then once they're live, we're going to start gathering data, right? We're going to be using the workflow and the application itself, and it's going to give us a lot of insight as to different data points, different pieces and parts that we can pull out and aggregate to different AI or ML systems. And then as the business requirements change, as our customer requirements change, right, we need to be able to adapt and optimize and re-employ those applications. So first and foremost, right, we have to build our models, right? And we have this concept of a model library. And again, this is everything you see here: forms, processes, cases, events, data objects. These are all models that can be built and attached or included into an application. And so once we have our models built, we deploy them and bring those models together to form a full application. There can be a number of different applications that are each serving a different purpose. For instance, a loan application might be a set of models specific to the loan application. Your client onboarding application might share some of those models, but you might have different models that you're using for the client onboarding. So again, the idea is you bring all these models together to form a flowable application. And then again, we're going to be using those applications in the real world at runtime, and we're going to gather some of that data that can be aggregated into different pieces and parts, perhaps dashboards, different types of reporting mechanisms, etc. And then as those applications continue to get used in the real world, we adapt and optimize, and we can change those models as our business requirements change and as the applications change. We're just updating those models, right? We don't have to go and build a new application. We don't even need to go in and build a new model, right? We're just leveraging the existing model, making those changes and republishing as a new application that's serving a different purpose. And then we continue the cycle and so forth. So why financial and banking? What's our use case? And I don't have a slide for it, but I can tell you that financial and banking industry comprises about 30 to 40%, sometimes more, of our overall revenue as a company. So it is our largest industry vertical. Here in the U.S., again, we're a bit newer, from a delivery standpoint. So we do have some use cases that we'll share here in a second, but I would say that the product itself is primarily focused on the financial and banking industries. However, we have a number of other industries here in the U.S. That are leveraging Flowable, things like retail, manufacturing, insurance, anything that's highly regulated. Flowable is definitely a great fit for. But for today's talk, we're going to focus primarily on the financial and banking side. So what are the different use cases, right, that we see? And I think there's a number of them. Obviously, not everything is listed in here, but these are the use cases where our clients are telling us that they're using Flowable for. Things like a smart appointment management or front office workplace, loan origination and loan applications, certainly an integral part of Flowable. I'll talk a little bit about one of our customers who was able to quickly create a COVID-19 small business loan application within just a few weeks of using Flowable. Certainly KYC, or know your customer, we see is a great use case for Flowable. client onboarding, client advisor relations. Certainly if you have high net worth individuals and looking for ways to digitize some of those strenuous processes and add the ability to communicate with them via chat or via third-party platforms. Right, we're seeing a lot of use cases for that. Certainly around wealth management, credit risk, and anti-money laundering, or AML. This is just a quick overview of some of the use cases that we see. Of course, I think there's certainly some additional use cases out there that we don't know about, and I think that's great, right? These are the things that our customers are asking us for Flowable, and that we're helping them develop and design currently real time. I'll talk a little bit about some of our customer base. I think I have two use cases here that I can talk about. Our largest client, that I can't mention by name, but is a very large global Swiss private bank, but it's also a global bank. And they have engaged, really are using Flowable end to end and all the aspects of Flowable. And over the last few years, we've built a bank workplace for them, really focusing on client collaboration from a banking context, customer engagement that's really centered around this chat-based collaboration. So using process or case-driven conversations, where Flowable is taking all of the workflow and the process automation on the back end, but employing that into a conversational context where you can utilize chat, whether it's mobile or web-based chat, for those high net worth individuals. And then a front process management, right, leveraging the chat bots for case management. And it was really a unique use case, right? This is a large customer of ours, really investing a lot of time in revamping how they go about digitalizing some of their processes and some of their use cases using the Flowable platform. And then Kindred Credit Union. This is a credit union that's up in the Ontario region of Canada. Somewhat of a smaller, SMB type of bank. However, this is a very unique use case. This is one I mentioned before. Kindred Credit Union approached us, I think it was just before COVID last year. So sometime in February, maybe March of 2020, and was looking for a platform to optimize their applications, but also, employ some of the BPMN and CMMN standards to some of the new applications that they were looking to optimize and kind of rewrite. And what Kindred did is, they ended up selecting Flowable, and within 2 weeks after they received their license keys, they were able to build a COVID-19 emergency loan application. Those small to medium-sized businesses that are their clients, to be able to provide a loan application, and they did this all within Flowable. So they were able to take their models, the workflow, everything that was employed for that loan application, and put that into production within just a few weeks. So that when COVID did hit, they had a process, a workflow, and a brand new application for these SMB clients to get the loan applications processed, submitted, and approved within just a matter of days. So what you'll see here in the demo that I'm going to go through is really an example of how quickly you can build some of these applications and put them into production and start using them in the real world. So I think without further ado, I'll go ahead and jump into a demo. I'm going to turn my camera off just for a second. And actually, we'll go ahead and get started. Let me just share my screen. Oh boy. All right, 1 second. And let's see. Application window. All right, so hopefully everyone can see my screen. And so what we'll first talk about now is Flowable Design. And this is, again, the design time tool. This is where we're building all of those models, attaching them to applications, and deploying those applications as a separate application. As you can see here in my design environment, I have a number of different applications. There's obviously some demos in here that we've done for other clients, but we're going to talk mostly about this loan application. And so when I click on the loan application app icon, you'll see that it brings us to our app container. Within that app container, I have a number of different models. And in fact, if I select all models, you can see here that I have a case model, a process model, a form model, number of different form models, some separate security policies, some templates, a few actions, and so forth. So all of these are models that are built that get attached or assigned to the model library and then also get assigned to the app. And so for instance, if I wanted to add a new model to the loan application, I have the option to create a new model, import a model from an existing file, or include an existing model. If I select include existing model, you'll see here that I'm brought and presented to my model screen. Of course, I have all of my case models, my process models, my decision tables, etc. All of these different models that I can basically select and employ into my app. So again, going back to that model-driven approach, the idea is that you build the models once and reuse those models as your application for other applications, right? Again, it's the reusability factor in a low-code way of being able to just select a model and adding it to your app. So I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to jump into the actual loan process itself, the loan application process. And once I select that, you'll see that it's already been built, but I'm brought into my design tool where I have my canvas in the middle. On the right-hand side, we have all of our attributes and some of our configuration options. On the left-hand side, we have all of our palette items. So all of these are BPMN 2.0 standard. We also have some custom components that are specific to Flowable, things like the HTTP task, the send and receive event task, which is great to use if you're integrating into event systems or event buses like Kafka, JMS, RabbitMQ, and then of course a number of different other palette items. Of course, I can view those in icon or list mode, and I can also limit what a palette or what a user would see. Right, so some of the customizability or extensibility factor of Flowable design, there are two major components. One is I can create custom components, right? So if I have a service task, for instance, that is always calling a unique system within the bank or the financial industry, it needs to be pre-configured so that a business user or a non-technical user can use it within their models. I can pre-configure all of the attributes, the class path, the result variable, etc. Some of those technical aspects that would go into a service task, I can pre-configure those and create custom components. The other aspect of Flowable design is it can be limited. So for instance, if I don't need to see any of these advanced activities or some of the structural components, I can hide those, right? And I can limit what a user or a modeler might see or use to make it easier so that they're not presented with a number of different options or all options. They just have what's specific to their business use case or their activity that they're looking at. But from a process perspective, we have a pretty simple loan application. Of course, with all BPMN, you have to have a start event. So we have the start event with this, basically the clear or the white circle. And then we have our first task, which is going to get some applicant details. There's some really important things to note on Flowable design itself. And one of them that I mentioned before is forms. So we have an extremely robust form engine and form capability that's available with Flowable out of the box that allows you to design and create extremely robust forms, dynamic forms, and assign those or attach those to user tasks, all within the Flowable design application. So here I have a simple user task that is get applicant details. But on the right-hand side here, you can see I have a form model or a form reference. Again, if I click on form reference here, you'll see I'm also presented with all of the other form models that I have within my application. So again, going back to that model-driven approach, the reusability factor, I don't have to create a new form. I can basically pick and choose from my model library if I want to do so, or I can create a new form. This form in general is a pretty basic form. And when I click on that, you'll see that our canvas changes to the form canvas. All of my palette items on the left-hand side have now changed to my form components. Before they were BPMN components here, right? But now I have my form components and everything is still drag and drop. So for instance, if I wanted to add a select or a checkbox, I am dragging it onto my canvas, and I've got a 12 column canvas that I can basically create any form that I would like, including some of those dynamic forms using tabs, accordions, or wizards. And by dynamic forms, what I'm talking about is essentially based on conditions or based on the selection criteria or variable data that a user might be entering in a form, my form changes. So from screen to screen, I can build extremely robust forms all within the Flowable design tool, and it doesn't have to be static. It can be dynamic in nature to really allow that flexibility to develop those custom forms. But I also have a really nice preview feature as well. So once we have our form built, I can click on this little eye icon here and see what that form is going to look like when it's presented to the end user. So I can start clicking on some of my radio buttons, start typing in some data, and it's going to give us our JSON payload and our configuration that's editable, right? So for instance, if I wanted to change full name to first name, I can do that and see what the behavior is going to look like to my user as it's presented in the UI. Of course, all my components. So from a developer perspective here, the form preview is really nice to have so that you can actually build those robust forms and preview them to simulate what they're going to look like to your end user at the end when it's at runtime. But going back to our process here, so we have our form. We're going to basically enter in some information: our age, our nationality, the salary, the requested loan amount, and what our current home status is, whether it's rented, mortgage, or owned. You'll notice that these red stars here all obviously indicate that those form fields are required. Right now, I only have 3 form fields that are required. And so when we present this to the Flowable work user interface, I will not be able to go to my next screen or to the next step in the process until I have all 3 of these forms, these required forms, completed. Going back to our process here, the next step in the loan process is going to be a decision table. We're calling this loan advice. Again, this is a drag and drop icon that is configured within your process. And all you need to do is basically build your DMN table or your business rules. And again, utilizing the low code aspect of the reusability factor, I can basically choose from any other DMN tables that I might have. In this case, I only have one, which is the loan advice. And we can see what that looks like by clicking on loan advice. So this is going to be your standard DMN table. We also have the ability to link together multiple DMN tables for more advanced logic and more advanced business rule decision making. We call that DRD. It stands for Decision Requirements Diagram. And again, it allows you to have multiple DMN tables that can link together for more advanced logic if your business rules require that. But this is a pretty simple DMN table, right? We have our inputs here in blue and our output in gray. And we can define the hit policy. So we're just going to say that the hit policy is the first, right? So the first hit that we get is the one that we're going to go with. However, we can choose a number of different hit policies based on how you want to employ that business rule. For the sake of the demo, we're just going to say that the first one that we get is the one that we're going to go with. That's the easy, happy path. But what this is saying is that we have 2 inputs. We have our age and our home status, right? If you remember the form, those are 2 of the required fields that we have to fill out. And all this is saying is that if we're younger than 24 years old, we're too young and we're going to require further checks. If we're between the ages of 24 and 60 and our house is rented, we are going to consider them no collateral, so they might be viable, so we're going to escalate. If we're older than 60 and our house is mortgaged, we might have potentially overstretched debt, and so we would want to escalate that for further review. And then anything else that falls in between will go to the no guidance. So this is a pretty straightforward DMN table. It's not going to give us a whole lot of information, but it is going to give us some guidance automatically using the DMN capabilities so that a user, an employee, anybody else, a human, if you will, doesn't have to make those complex decisions, right? We can use DMN to do that. And then after that, we're going to go back to a human task where we're going to review the application. Again, we're going to be presented with a form, and that form is going to give the output of the credit advice or the loan advice to that user so that they can make a decision. At that point, the user has to make a decision. We have 3 different paths that we're going to take. The bad path is the rejection path. And so we're going to inform that user that their loan has been rejected. If there is escalation that we need to escalate to a compliance officer, for instance, we're going to escalate that and let the compliance officer make that decision. And then the happy path, obviously, is to approve the loan. And so if the loan is approved, we are going to assign a manager. Again, there's another form that's associated with that. Then we're going to generate a document. One of the low-code features that I love about Flowable is our ability to generate documents as well as merge documents. So this is a document icon where I'm generating a document, and on the right-hand side, I'm basically just defining where my document is coming from, the output type, whether I want it to be PDF or Word, again, the document name, and the template key. So this is a template that's already loaded into the app as a model, and I'm just referencing where I want to find that template and what I want to do with it as I generate that document. This is going to be an automated task, right? So you're going to see this happen automatically. And then once the loan is approved, we're going to inform that user, hooray, that their loan has been accepted, and then we can go ahead and close out that process. So it's pretty straightforward. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually put this into production, and I'm going to run this at runtime, and we'll talk about some of the other aspects of the Flowable platform and what that looks like. So I'm going to stop sharing this, and we are going to share a different screen. So let's share my, all right. So what you're looking at here is the Flowable Work UI, or the runtime application. This is the business user application. Now mine looks a little loud, just to be honest, because I've got a lot of things going on, but on the left-hand side, you'll see here, this is customized for a customer. Let's just call it Princia Bank. So there is some theming that you can do to the UI. I'll say that 50% of our users, our clients, use Flowable out of the box to some degree, meaning they're using this UI as sort of the application that the business users are using, or external users are using. The other 50% are using some sort of custom UI. At the end of the day, what you're seeing here is a React application that is integrated and connected to the REST APIs that we provide. So, excuse me, a lot of the, if you are using a custom UI, everything that you'll see here as I go through this demo can be supported using a custom UI, using React or Angular. So some of our clients don't want to see all these different menu tabs. Some of our clients want to see their task inbox, which looks like this. On the left-hand side or the right-hand side, right? So there's a lot of flexibility on how you customize this UI, but this is what we're using out of the box. This is what it looks like out of the box. You can see I have my task list here. There's a number of different reporting capabilities that we have that I'll talk about in a second. We also have the ability to create custom dashboards. And so if I click on this loan app, for instance, you'll see here that I have a custom dashboard that is only assigned to the loan application itself. And so our dashboards are built using pages. They use the same form components that I showed you before building forms. And it allows you to really create custom dashboards that are specific to personas or different use case, different users, and then deploy those into your runtime environment. So if I go back to Flowable Design, what you would see is that I've built this basic four component dashboard within Flowable Design, and then I attach it to my loan application app so that it shows up here on the left-hand side. Of course, there's a number of different apps that I have. Some of this you won't see out of the box, but things like compliance, where I can go and search for different keywords through a conversation, or using our Elasticsearch capabilities, right? The robust indexing for historical search and so forth. Won't talk a little bit about that today, but those are all available out of the box. So what I'm going to do now is basically just run through that loan application and show you what that would look like that we just built. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start a new loan application. And here's our loan application. What you didn't see before is that we did have a start form, right? As part of that start process palette item, we had a start form that was built, and I'm just going to enter in some information and hit submit. We've now kicked off the loan application process. it's live, it's running, and we've got to kind of work through that loan application as part of the demo. For the sake of the demo, I'm admin, so I'm going to be completing all of the user tasks, completing the approvals, and so forth. In the real world, obviously, you would have different groups, different personas that would be assigned to different aspects of the process or the case at different stages and so forth. And that's all done at design time. There's some really nice features that we have right out of the box when it comes to being able to identify where you're at, audit trails, and so forth within a process. If I click on this history tab here, you'll see a really nice graphical representation of where we're currently at in that loan application process. So everything in blue means that it's been completed. Everything in green is where we're currently at. So we're currently in that get applicant details user task. Of course, the audit trail for every click, including the inception or the creation or instantiation of that process or case, and then of course being able to go directly to the process and so forth. Some other nice features are being able to bring in people. You can see here I've got a lot of roles for this demo. I'm the owner, the starter, the assignee, and the participant. However, if I wanted to bring in somebody like Annie Austin, who is a senior reviewer, I can loop her in and add her to the process at any point, as well as develop a chat with her one-on-one and so forth. So there's some really nice conversational feature and functionality that are built in out of the box to Flowable work. But for the sake of the demo, we're just going to run through this. So I've got my first get applicant details task. You'll see here that my name came over from the start form. So now I'm responsible for entering in some information. We're going to say that our home is rented. We're requesting a $15,000 loan, 45 years old, Swiss, and I have a $65,000 salary. Now you'll notice here that this complete button did not become active until I entered in data into my last required field, right? So goes back to the requirements there. But I'm gonna go ahead and complete that. You'll see here now that we're actually in the review application task. What happened was we went through that DMN table very quickly and had provided some loan advice already based on the applicant details that we had submitted. I can also see the path that took by clicking on decisions here, so that as a user or as a manager, I can see where those decisions are being made and make sure that I monitor that those paths are the right path. So everything in green is where we took, right? We entered in 45, so we fell in between 24 and 60. We said that our house is rented. And so we're gonna give some guidance on the next user task that says no collateral, consider viability. So it gives you some really nice insight as to what those decisions are being made or what decisions are being made. And of course, all of the inputs and outputs and so forth. But let's go back to the review application task. And you can see here that the advice, this is just another form field that is pulling in the default path or the default variable from the decision table that basically says no collateral, consider viability. Now, based on the way that we set this up, I still, as the reviewer, I still have the ability to accept, reject, or escalate. And for the sake of time, I'm actually just going to accept it. However, if we escalated, you would see that it would go to a different escalated review task, which is actually assigned to somebody else. And actually what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just do that. Let's escalate it. Now, I see the escalated review as well, but if we were to log in as the compliance officer, which is Tim Lee, you'll notice that in his open tasks, let's see, tasks here for me, and actually that is not assigned correctly, so that didn't work. All right, so let's go back and let's go back to admin. And what we're going to do is we're just going to take the happy path and accept it. And you'll see here that we are in the assign manager task. We did go through that escalated review. And we're going to go ahead and assign a manager. In this case, it's going to be Michael Gordon. And we're going to attach his photo so that the applicant knows what Michael looks like. And this is actually going to be me, but we'll go ahead and attach a photo, complete that process. And the final step in the process is to inform that user that the loan has been accepted. And you can see that once we do that, we have generated a document. This is a simple PDF template that was developed from a Word doc that all it's doing is taking the variables that were entered in the form fields and generating a basic looking template that can be sent off, emailed, printed, etc. to your client. And then once we complete that, the process is complete. And you can see that here in the history tab. We've gone through all the steps. We've ended that process. So that from a high level is what it would look like to actually run through the loan application itself. There are a few other feature functionality that come with the tool set that I do want to talk about. One of them is Flowable Inspect. This is something that I didn't talk about before, but Inspect is a unique feature to Flowable. You really won't find this in any other platform. It's a real big differentiator for us, but it's a tool that allows you to test and debug your processes, cases, etc., and simulate them at runtime, and really cuts down the amount of unit testing that a developer or modeler has to go through. And that's built into the Flowable work product itself. So I can actually enable Flowable Inspect through my admin tool here. And what we're going to do is we're going to kick off the same loan application that we just ran through, but we're going to run it in demo mode or in test mode so that you can see how Flowable Inspect works. So what we're going to do is we're going to find that same loan application, and I now have these little green crosshairs that are presented to us. And so once I click that, I can run it in test mode. Again, we're presented with our start form because that's how I built the process. But we'll go ahead and enter in some information. And once that process is started, we can now start using Flowable Inspect. So there's some instructions here, obviously, on how to use it. But what we're going to do is we're going to step through each step of the process, and we're going to go through it, capturing all of the sequence flows, all of the applicant details. Again, here you can see that task is now showing up. So we need to enter in some data. Let's go ahead and enter in the same data that we put in before and click on complete. And as we step through that process, it is basically simulating all of the things that need to happen. The DMN table, right? The loan advice, all of the data variables. And as I look at this and inspect everything, I have full access to all of those variables. I can even do things like simulate activities or timer events or event registry events where I can, even if they are not developed yet or in production, right? Let's say, for instance, you have a HR system that's not quite up and ready to go, but it's going to require several service or REST calls within your process. I can simulate those and simulate the expected behavior, the expected outcome using Flowable Inspect. Even doing simple things like evaluating complex expressions. I'm not going to use a complex one, but if we just do something like age, right, and evaluate that expression, I get the output, right? So if you do have more complex expressions that you want to evaluate before you go into production or before you push to runtime, this is a really nice tool to be able to use that and really limit and cut down the amount of unit testing that your developers have to go through. The best thing about Flowable Inspect, well, there's two things. One is you can use this in an API-only fashion, right? So a lot of our clients aren't using this particular UI, right? They have their own custom UI that they're using. That really helps with integrating into your CI/CD pipelines for development, for continuous integration, continuous delivery, as well as everything gets recorded. So as I run through this, all of those tests, every step along the way is being recorded. So as I make changes, as I make different configuration changes and optimization, I don't have to go through all of that process again, step by step, to get the outcome or the output that I want. I can make those changes and then basically replay that process, and it's going to give us sort of a traffic light overview of all of the successful steps, and if there were any errors, it would give us the log file and the error output of the error. So again, a really nice tool to have to cut down the amount of unit testing that you might have to go through. The idea is that you build it, test it, build it, test it, and so forth, and you're on your way. I can also basically download this into a JSON file. So if I do have my CI/CD pipelines configured, right, it's downloading and giving me the entire JSON output, so that I can use that for my development, testing, QA, etc. So that's Flowable Inspect. The last tool that I'll show is called Flowable Control. And I'm going to bring up Flowable Control, which is the administration console, or the application for admin. And right out of the box, we have some really nice dashboards that just became available in the previous version, that you don't have to configure, right? They're all available out of the box. But having some visibility into my running instances, my completed instances, running cases, active cases. For instance, if we go back to the last month, you'll see that we've got quite a few active cases, a few completed cases, several open tasks from earlier last week, etc. What I really like is the system resources capability, right? This is going to give you some insight as to how much CPU, how much memory you're using. So from an architecture perspective, right, you have a lot of visibility into how you want to scale, some of the sizing that you might need based on the usage and different applications that you're running and so forth. That's all built into the box. But things like the async executor, job execution, these are all sort of out of the box dashboards. And then going back to the model library, right, having full insight as to what's happening at runtime based on your process models, your case models, your form components, any kind of templates or events and so forth. So if we look at the process instance that we just started for the loan application here, and I go into it, you'll have a nice graphical representation of where we're currently at in the process. Of course, all of the different variables here that have been entered thus far. As an admin, I have the ability to add different variables, change or edit different variables. Again, so this is the idea that as the application is at runtime, I still need the ability to manage it. Users make mistakes, we're all human. And there has to be a really nice UI application, a web-based application that allows you to quickly make those changes as you need to, based on your needs. But being able to do things like change the state of a process, right? As I mentioned before, everything in blue has been completed, and we're currently in this review application state. So let's say, for instance, that in the get applicant details state of the process, some data was entered in error. I can quickly go back and revert and change the state of that process so that that user is then presented with the new applicant details form. And we can double check that by, let me just reshare my work screen. I wish I could just do my desktop, but let's do the work screen. And if we look into that same loan application that has been opened, you'll notice that we're back into the get applicant details step of the process. Now, I do see in my history, however, that we did go to that review application stage at one point. So that's still showing up as blue, but we're currently back in step one of the process because some data was entered incorrectly and so forth. And then going back to Flowable Control, let's do control. There's some number of different configuration options for cases, forms. This is also where you're defining your users, your user definition, your user groups, all of your system info, configuration, and so forth. So I touched on Flowable Design, Flowable Control, Flowable Inspect, which are the three primary applications that come with the Flowable stack, as well as the Flowable Work Runtime application, which is our UI web application that you can use out of the box at runtime after you design and create your workflows, your processes, your cases, etc. So I'll go ahead and stop there and open it up for any questions.
Yes, thank you very much for that detailed demo, Paul.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yep.
These slides and I believe the presentation will be posted on the Bright Talk channel. So feel free to check that here momentarily. And as always, reach out to us with any questions, comments, concerns, etc. Thanks for your participation.